Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today from the comforts of your home. I'm here with Andrew Luk. Well, first I'll introduce myself and give an introduction to the talk, and then we'll kind of just dive in. My name is Willem Molesworth. I'm the director of the Sarthe Gallery. I'm also one of the vice presidents of the Hong Kong Art Gallery Association, and I have my own side project called Suitcase Institute that I do with my wife. This is Andrew Luk. He's an artist who is represented by Sarthe. He is based here in Hong Kong. He was the first artist we had engage in our residency program, where we kind of give our gallery to a Hong Kong-based artist for 2 months in the summer. He's since then, which happened about 3 years ago, he's done very, very well. His artwork belongs to several very important public collections and private collections across the world. Most recently, his large-scale installation, Haunted Salvaged, was supposed to be displayed in Art Basel's Encountered section. But since that was canceled, we have taken it and will be showing it in the gallery in an exhibition that opens April 4th. Oh, I'm sorry, April 11th. April 11th. He also has artwork being exhibited here in Asia Society, and that show I think opens in May. It's called Next Act, and it's all about Hong Kong contemporary art, which is really interesting. So the title of our conversation today is Futuristic Past-Present. I'll read the blurb, and then I'll start asking Andrew some questions. We all live in the past. The fraction of a second it takes for our minds to process the world around us is a guarantee that we always lag behind in the current moment. Nonetheless, the world at large spirals uncontrollably forward. Fictional elements of sci-fi novels that once seemed far away are now ever-present reminders of our current era, one that is stuck between the near past, the unattainable present, and the far-off future. Andrew Luk's practice, strongly rooted in Hong Kong and the city's unique place within the world politic, engages these ideas and more. I will discuss these concepts with Andrew on the eve of his participation in Asia Society's exhibition Next Act and Sarthe's exhibition Shifting Landscapes. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Your work has a very strong connection to place. Your Chronicle Compression series, which I have on the screen right now, is in which this series, you take aluminum and you rub it on surfaces. And it cannot be made unless there are surfaces within a specific context and a specific location that are infused with some sort of history. Why? Why is this?
Hello? Well, the simple answer is that like the space itself or the surface itself has to it needs to titillate in a way, in a very specific way that is interesting. The historical context of it, however, comes from the idea of the notion that history is ongoing and it's forever, and it sort of runs through us. It runs through the things that we interact with. It's a story of us, in a sense. It's and what we experience as the here and now is sort of the accumulation of history at that moment. But the use of aluminum, of like very thin aluminum, and the process of making a rubbing by hand, it's sort of like it's like archiving a surface, and in a way it's a facsimile, it's an abstraction. However, it's a very accurate rendition of that surface. There's really no choosing or picking of like how to. There's only one way, in essence, to really manage the surface, and that's just to get the rubbing as perfectly as possible. But it's the tediousness and the difficulty of like doing this for hours that gives it a kind of, I guess it becomes very familiar in a sense, and then recreating that with like the fiberglass on the back and sort of building it in a way that it remains just surface, and it sort of speaks to, for me at least, it speaks to about our understanding of history, that while we do experience history in our daily lives, we sort of, in essence, you're saying in the here and the now. However, it's all compact within that, and it condenses into the present day. And the idea, I guess, as a metaphor or like a symbol of that, it's the compression of the aluminum molecules against the surface. Yeah, the surfaces are also very unique. I have to pick ones that are specifically like not too brittle or not too soft. They have to be usually stone or brick. And the great thing about that is that you know, the materials of the 20th century were said to be like steel, brick, and glass. So it's sort of, there's this weird past-present thing that I really enjoy, and the compression of it. It's just, for me at least, there's something that's said about, like, it's beyond just archiving a surface that might be neglected. It's runs a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it seems to be a metaphor, right? I mean, the way you've just described compressing is not only true for the material itself, but within the artwork, there are compressions of various histories within it. So, for example, the one I have here is the one you did for the University of Chicago Hong Kong Center here at this one. At their center at what is it? Mount Davis?
Yes.
Which is out by Pok Fu Lam, and which used to be which has an incredibly rich history. Used to be a prison.
It was a
royal
prison,
barracks.
It was a Royal Engineers barracks. It was a prison, and then before that, it was a battery.
And at one point, a migrant like center, right?
Yeah, migrant center.
For refugees or something like that.
And the Japanese also lived there for a little while.
Yeah. So a place with a lot of really rich kind of history, and within the artwork itself, there were multiple textures that you've compressed within one artwork that exist coincide with one another, right?
Yeah.
And I think that illustrates your idea further, right? Even within this, for example, there's reference to the Royal Engineers. There's an R&E. There's a reference to a kind of a gun case as well, which is really interesting. And yeah, I mean, it's incredibly kind of rich, I think.
Thank you.
I guess let's move on to the next kind of body of work. A hugely, or just another aspect of your work, a hugely dynamic aspect of your creativity is materiality. And in next act, you'll be unveiling a series of 4 sculptures, all of which reference boundary stones that had formerly been scattered across Asia Society's grounds and are now on display within the facility. Can we talk about why you used different materials and how they convey different meanings within these artworks?
Yeah. Well, firstly, the use of the boundary stones and the making of the boundary stones. It's sort of I wanted to approach this series of work in a slightly different way that I've done in the past, and I was really interested in Asia Society as a site and its history, as a barracks, and in the magazine the Explosives magazine, where they manufactured and stored explosives and ammunition, as well as like the history of that and the connotations, the socio-historical connotations related to that. So the boundary stones are granite stones used to mark off the edges of the land here, and they have insignias that are from the Royal Navy, because Admiralty was essentially owned by annexed by the Admiralty. And so the fun thing, though, is that the original boundary stones are made from like granite, and it's likely that it came from near Mount Butler, that area. So you kind of have a local history there, and the geology is also there. But the boundary stones themselves, I'm recreating them using 4 different materials. The first one being charcoal, and charcoal is a byproduct of gunpowder manufacturing, and that's suspended with resin, so it's not really, it's more like a condensation of particles. The second one that I'm doing is made of salt licks. So salt licks are essentially blocks of salt used to feed like bovine and rumens, so like cows and sheep, and it's supposed to supplement the nutritional the nutrition that they may not get from normal feed. But like Asia society on a green hillside, like despite being somewhat in the middle of the city, has sort of the area has a link to a country park, and there are animals that come through here. I've seen like wild pigs. I've heard stories about civets and is this still working? Yeah. Okay. Civets and porcupines. So the idea being that the animals that come through the area on their way to other places might stop by and like help sculpt this boundary stone and wear away at it and alter its form. The next one I decided to make out of copper, and copper is well, on one hand, it's also made with, it's the material that was used to make shell casings, but also it's a noble metal, so it has sanitation qualities. Like hospitals and restaurants back in the day used to have copper on their door panels, so when you were use your hand to open it, it would, in a sense, like kill some of the bacteria. And the sanitation aspect of it is very much related to colonialism in general, and how like health and sanitation was used as a means to development and a lot of essentially colonial policies at the time. And on the one hand, it's like housing developments to clear hillsides of slums, and then the very generous side, and on the other side, it's the weaponization of commerce and religion and a belief system to help civilize the native. And sanitation is in a sense used in both ways, and copper is in a sense on both sides of that.
And then there's one other.
Oh, right. There's one other one that's made from ice. Yeah.
And I think that series in and of itself is actually a really wonderful kind of summary of the various ideas within your practice. The charcoal kind of referencing violence, not necessarily in a bloody or a conflict kind of way, but the violence of natural materials, something that fire kind of ravages. The salt licks also referencing nature itself, I think is really interesting. And the copper referencing human history, narratives of colonialization, development, sterilization, really fascinating. And then ice also capturing this kind of ephemerality. I think it's a really cool series. Can't wait to see it on display here. I guess let's move on and talk about your next exhibition, Shifting Landscape at the Sarthe. In that exhibition, you'll be unveiling a large-scale installation that you have personally described to me as an anthropogenic near-future deathscape. In a more official capacity, I would describe it as a kinetic cityscape that is comprised of dystopian, post-apocalyptic, rotting, man-made materials. The work is very clearly engaging a discourse about the future, and that's due in large part to how it looks and functions. Why?
So in regards to like my practice, there's sort of I would say the Asia Society show is sort of on one hand history up until now in a way. But it stops short of like trying to make any prophetic sort of visions of the future. And then I would say the Sarthe show is maybe tries to attempt at that. But of course, like the thing with the attempting the near future is that inevitably you have to have some distance, and you have to allow yourself some give. I mean, this is kind of where I think abstraction is able to step in and sort of, it's not just a strictly research-based work. It's more of the idea of the idea of the ephemeral, the idea of things sort of hanging in the air, and like a lot of it's suspended, and it's just bounces and counterbalances. It's these giant mobiles that take up the gallery space, and it's sort of trying to capture the feeling or have an emotional reaction to those things. Why? I would say like it's strictly, I mean, it's more about what is perceivable in the near future given current circumstances. I mean, on one hand, we're living in a tumultuous time, and where does it go, or what does it mean for a, a, the cityscape or the landscape itself? Like, how do you make an emotional? How do you get an emotional response from like something as like I would say essential as a landscape in art? So it's trying to push those buttons given the current situations, I would say. Yeah.
Fascinating. I think it's really interesting, and especially given the current time, right, where I think the metaphorical landscape around us is shifting, it's changing, right, and this kinetic kind of installation in all of its kind of strange materiality and otherworldly type textures approaches this kind of uncertainty that I think we're all feeling, and that's what's really speaking to now. And referencing landscape, that brings us perfectly into our next conversation topic, and that is your Horizon Scan series. Here, I wonder if I can do this one. Is that going to work? It's supposed to be a GIF. Okay, cool. Another often reoccurring theme within your work is landscape, as you just mentioned. For example, one of your most well-known bodies of works is the Horizon Scan series, where you torch and char canvas with homemade napalm. After adding LEDs and submerging the results in resin, the works look kind of like aerial landscapes. When I look at them, I see the surface of far-off planets, something like Venus, Mars, or maybe even the moon, while others see more earthbound geological features like coral reefs. When addressing the landscape within this format and through these materials, what are you hoping to contribute or add to the already vast field of portraying landscapes within art history?
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
Sorry.
So the process of making them, it's sort of relies on heat and pressure, which is essentially how geological landscapes are formed. And it's important that they're not representative of any one place or any specific landscapes, because again, it's that sort of the wiggle room that abstraction allows you of creating something out of nothing and then being okay with it. For me, it's much more about the material and the process and creating the landscape, but not one, because it doesn't reference anything. It could be anything. It's not just necessarily earthbound. It's not necessarily space. It's not necessarily like deep sea ocean. People have said coral as well. But the LEDs sort of are meant to reference time and the passing of celestial time. I mean, cosmic time, sorry. What I hope to add to the discourse on landscape, I would say, I would say if you look at it from the lens of like the idea of space, it's sort of seen as the final frontier. Landscape traditionally has been one of conquest or ownership, or one of taming nature. And in this way, like at least with the substance, like I set it on fire and I'd have to leave it because it's just too hot to work with. It sort of does its own thing. And maybe I come back later and I tear it up and collage it, but the process of it requires like a decision made and then just allowing it to create itself in a way. And it sort of runs up against the taming of nature. In terms of the conquest, nor is it a conquest for me. It's not, it doesn't have that quality, at least. But I do, however, really enjoy the idea of it being like a satellite photo. It's from above. It relates to how we understand landscape in the 21st century, either from the screen of your phone or the screen of a computer. You're always looking at it from above, and your entire spatial sort of relationship with it is altered in that sense. I mean, traditionally, a landscape has a horizon line. You can see where the artist or the artist is painting or drawing or photographing from. You have a sense of like that person's place in time, their feet on the ground or their butt in a chair, but you lose that with the aerial photography or satellite imaging. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how we navigate the world these days, right? As we drive around in cars or navigate through cities, we're kind of on our phones looking at an aerial perspective of the world around us, which is kind of a uniquely 21st century phenomenon. Yeah. Thank you. I guess one other thing I'd like to touch on within this series. Okay. Actually, we're gonna wrap up. I'd like to invite everyone to our opening at Sarthe on April 11th. We will probably be implementing some sort of social distancing measures, but I hope to see everybody there. Is there anything else you want to say, Andrew?
No, not specifically.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Then I think that's it, and we'll call it here. Thanks everyone for joining us online, and we'll let the next folks set up. Thanks.
Thank you.